Welcome back. The National Prosecuting Authority has refused to review charges against Thales and its subsidiary Thint in the corruption case involving former President Jacob Zuma. Thales has made representations to the National Director of Public Prosecutions asking for the charges to be dropped. And remember, the company and Zuma will appear in court on Friday. It will be Zuma's third appearance on 16 charges of fraud, corruption, racketeering and money laundering. The SABC tried to get comment from the NPA, but the prosecuting authority declined to give further clarity on the matter, saying it's sub judice. To discuss, we're joined by Tiso Blackstar legal journalist Karyn Maughn from our studios in Cape Town. Karyn, thank you for being with us. Do you buy that argument? Is it sub judice?
I don't think that that's necessarily a fair comment from the NPA, given that when it decided that it would not accept former President Jacob Zuma's representations on why he should not be prosecuted, we did see the NDPP, Shaun Abrahams, come out, make a press statement, address the representations made by the former president, and then say why he had refused them. So there has been public ventilation of the representations process in the Zuma matter. So it does seem slightly odd that the NPA has chosen not to make similar disclosures in this case. We have confirmed with the lawyers for Thales that they have received this letter from Shaun Abrahams, and we understand that in that letter he simply says that he has taken the advice of the Zuma team who have reviewed the representations made by Thales Thint and basically found that, according under the NPA Act, that there is a reasonable prospect of success in prosecution, and therefore these representations must fail.
So, just as a reminder, this is the company that a court found previously did offer to pay the former president R500,000, I think a year, to protect them, to not get them involved in investigations. On what grounds do we know did they say that they shouldn't be prosecuted?
Well, remember, of course, that was in the context of the corruption case against Schabir Shaik, in which the state essentially painted Schabir Shaik as an individual who effectively had the former president on retainer, Jacob Zuma. Over a number of years, he paid everything from car washes to Jacob Zuma's children's school fees, all in according to the state and what was proven in that matter, to essentially have Zuma on call to further Shaik's business interests. Now, it's important to remember that Shaik's and Corby Holdings was the BEE partner of Thales Thint, and who, of course, was the company that scored a 2.6 billion rand frigate deal for 4 frigates during 1997 as part of the arms deal. Now, the case that was made and was successfully prosecuted in Schabir Shaik's matter, and which withstood, as you rightly point out, appeal, was essentially that Schabir Shaik had been part of the facilitation of a bribe, a 500,000 rand a year bribe, as you correctly pointed out, in exchange for the former president, then the deputy president, essentially protecting it from any future arms deal inquiry. You'll remember, of course, Francis, at that stage, individuals like Patricia de Lille, then a PAC member, going into Parliament with the de Lille dossier and saying that it was serious averments and that they required investigation. And it was really in that context that the French arms company intervened. Now, of course, the argument that it could have made, and we don't know with any great deal of certainty that they did, because those representations are not public at this stage, is that it could have said that, this was merely a donation to the Jacob Zuma Education Trust, that this was money that was not given with any corrupt intent, but was merely a part of a generous donation made to a political figure and his particular projects. So we don't know if that was in fact the case that they made. But what complicates the situation somewhat for the NPA, and it'll be interesting to see how they address this in trial. Remember, of course, that when Schabir Shaik was put on trial, charges were not pursued against Thales on the basis that they handed over an affidavit from Elaine Titard, one of the officials, essentially confirming that, in fact, the so-called encrypted facts, which confirmed that so-called bribe agreement, had in fact been signed by him and was a bona fide document. Now, we don't know in the aftermath what necessarily persuaded the NPA to then reinstitute charges with President Jacob Zuma, but we do know, Francis, that in fact they're saying that Zuma, Shabir Sheikh, and the French arms company were, under the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, essentially a racketeering enterprise, an organized crime machine in which an exercise or kind of machinery of corruption was carried out. So these are very serious charges. They carry with them a 25-year sentence, and Thales will know that, you know, the consequences for them, if they are found guilty of this, will be immensely serious.
And how much clout do our courts have here? What if they find people guilty who are living it up in France?
Well, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this matter. I mean, one of the things that is pivotal for the NPA is that prosecutor Billy Downer, who successfully obtained the conviction of Shabir Sheikh, withstood multiple attempts at appeal by Sheikh, is probably, in my view, the best kind of corruption prosecutor in South Africa at this moment, is leading the prosecution. But I think the most pivotal issue is is this case ever going to really get off the ground? You know, we know, for instance, that this Thales Thint is mooting a possible permanent stay of prosecution application. That could take several years. We could see witness evidence led. We know, for instance, when former President Jacob Zuma was speaking about bringing a permanent stay of prosecution, he wanted people like former President Thabo Mbeki to testify at it. We then see the possibility of appeals, possible appeals to the Constitutional Court, which again will buy further time. We also know that the former president has himself indicated that he wants to review Sean Abrams' decision to prosecute him in the first place. So whether or not this case actually gets off the ground, I think, is the more pivotal point as to what will unfold when it finally makes it to court. If the Sheikh case is anything to go by, the state has a very, very strong evidential case. And one of the main grounds on which the court found that, for instance, former President Jacob Zuma should be prosecuted was there had simply been no credible attack on the evidence in this case, and that the entire attack, which hinged on the prosecution, was really on this issue of political interference rather than the strength of the case itself.
So on Friday we could see a postponement or a technical argument. This will be the first time, Karyn, that Jacob Zuma is appearing with his new look legal team. Give us the details there.
Well, this is a fascinating development in the story. We know that the former president is currently locked in a battle with the DA and EFF over continued state funding of his defense team. Now, in the wake of that legal action, President Cyril Ramaphosa's office has agreed to sponsor the president to the tune of one senior counsel, a silk if you were, a senior advocate who will make his case in court, and two junior counsel. But despite this, former President Jacob Zuma will arrive at court with four senior counsel, very well-known advocates in their own right, some of the best criminal defense lawyers in the country, and a junior counsel. The spokesperson for President Cyril Ramaphosa telling me that there has been no agreement reached by the president. And of course, in terms of that, the funding of those counsel. And the big question, I think, for many South Africans will be just who exactly is fitting the bill for this incredible new look legal team, which of course includes Mike Helens and Dani Yobert, who are both representing Duduzane Zuma in his culpable homicide and corruption case. We also know that Muzi Sekakane, who authored the SARS, who ran the SARS commission into those initial allegations against Johan van Lochrenberg about the so-called rogue unit, as part of that team, as is Tabani Masuku, of course, very well known for defending Laudi Motsweneng in the so-called SABC 8 matter, and also representing John Hlophe. So this is not a small or a lightweight legal team at all. These are serious players. They're very expensive. And I think everyone is wondering just who exactly is paying for their bill.
All right, so we'll see if we get any hints on Friday. Karyn, before you go, another story that I think you've been on top of, the Public Investment Corporation. And today, the finance minister announcing that he's going to investigate. How big a development is that?
This is huge, Francis, and I think, as someone who's seasoned within the economic space, you are very well aware of the magnitude of this particular announcement. Essentially, it comes in the wake of the UDM launching a High Court application seeking that the minister be compelled to suspend PIC CEO Dan Matjila and then to conduct disciplinary action against him. Now, it's been very clear from the court papers that while the Minister of Finance opposed that initial application, he has by no means given his endorsement of the PIC or its CEO. He's now asking for a forensic audit into undisclosed managerial figures within that organization. Of course, one of the major critiques in the UDM's court application against the minister was that the PIC board simply failed to adequately address certain allegations against Dan Matjila, including these claims, which he, of course, has vociferously denied, that he used his position to benefit a woman who was allegedly his lover. Now, he has denied that very, very strongly. But one of the main issues that has come through in the court application was that the PIC board did nothing to substantively investigate those claims and only opted for a so-called verification process where the head of internal audit within the PIC basically checked whether Dan Matjila's version of events could be reasonably seen to be correct. There was no kind of substantive forensic investigation, despite the PIC board on the 15th of September initially saying that there should be such an investigation. Now, the minister saying that he wants that kind of investigation into these undisclosed figures, and he also wants a deep level of inquiry into the functioning of the PIC itself. Given the recent revelations about the PIC's involvement in the so-called VBS bank scandal, the resignations and firing of two central officials linked to that scandal in terms of apparent lack of oversight, I think that the minister is very well aware that these steps need to be taken, and the South African public need to be reassured that the pension funds of several 100,000 government employees who are managed by the PIC are indeed safe and in the hands of capable, responsible and honest people.
I think you're right, because there's been a lot of smoke, as you say, a lot of questions around who exactly, some controversial figures that the PIC is giving funds to. So like you say, will this finally bring that matter to a close? The PIC saying they get so many applications. What are they to do? There's always going to be controversy somewhere along the line. Do we buy that?
I think, what was so interesting was when Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, as he then was removed, and he had that extraordinary press conference at the Treasury. One of the issues he earmarked was this issue of the Deputy Minister of Finance being involved in the PIC and whether it was appropriate that there be political involvement in the PIC and this profound need for transparency within that organization. Now, we know there are individuals within Treasury who are pushing very hard for a greater sense of accountability and openness. We've also seen that, Malusi Gigaba in October last year actually put forward a request to the PIC to disclose its transactions over the last 3 years. The BEE consortiums who were involved, what exactly was happening there, and the PIC taking legal advice and not actually, agreeing at that stage to the minister's request. So clearly there was some degree of alarm. Now, Nene, when he wrote to the PIC board in May this year, actually referenced this Gigaba request and said, he was looking into why it had been made and what the board's response to, and I think was to it. And I think that indicates that there is a greater need for transparency, there is a greater need for disclosure. And there shouldn't be this defensive stance towards interrogation of how these investments are made and who is in control of this. The fact that the PIC had a 25% stake in VBS Bank and literally had officials on the board of that bank or directors serving as directors at a stage where it appears there was whole-scale looting of that organization certainly does raise eyebrows and cause for concern. And I think any process in which we have a greater sense of possible accountability and transparency within that organization must be welcomed with open arms.
And thank you. We welcome your analysis. Karyn Maughn, live for us from Cape Town, Tiso Blackstar journalist.